Hemi-Sync uses binaural beats that take one frequency in one ear that slightly differs and a different frequency in the other. For instance, you can't hear 4 cycles per second, but you could hear 2000 and 2004, and your brain will interpolate that and produce what's called a binaural beat. And by adjusting the frequencies, you can induce specific brainwave states, some of which are very conducive for sleep, some for relaxation, some for increasing focus and attention, reducing pain. It has a lot of wonderful uses.
Just to build on to what Brian was mentioning before, there's quite a bit of science and research that's behind this binaural beat technology for several decades. First of all, we know that it goes from the ear to the superior alveolar nucleus on the other side, to the reticular activating system, and then the cortex. The cortex is where we become aware, and that's where the effect takes place. Now, there is also, interestingly enough, science that shows that there is a production of activity. In other words, if you were naive to the sound, and for the first time you hear theta waves, and I'll talk more about what the brainwave states are, but let's say you hear theta for the first time, you can have a much easier time getting into that state after even a single time of hearing it. Now, imagine what happens after 2 or 3 times. Actually, it's been measured, and the effect is so much stronger. You can reproduce it and reinforce it. After hearing it multiple times, you can turn it on and off as you wish. The other thing is, as far as science, is that, and in Summit Wellness, we talk about something called the brainwave states or the languages of the brain. So just to cover a little bit of that briefly. The terms languages of the brain is something that we came up with, but I'm sure it's been said before. The brain communicates in certain languages, meaning just like I can speak certain languages, I can speak English, I can speak Russian, I can speak a limited Spanish. There's also frequency ranges or categories of frequencies that correspond to certain functional states that are effective in pretty much every human. And the brain is quite uniform. For instance, delta. Delta is in a frequency range of up to 3 cycles per second. And delta is, interestingly enough, the language of the brainstem. It's the language of sleep, stage 2, stage 3 sleep. And it's a language that many humans in North America, but other places, are not very familiar with. Many people don't get good sleep. Another language that we're not familiar with is the language of Theta. Theta is an amazing language. It's the language of the, it's the language of the thalamus, the great relay station. Everything comes in, and then it goes to the cortex, and then through the pathways it goes back down again. It's a language of the limbic system, memory, emotion. How many of us fall in love? How many of us feel anxious, nervous? How often does the memory, emotion, and other factors and aspects changes and actually drives the bus, affects our decision making, and it's not the cortical thinking, it's not the logical brain that's doing it. It's actually a stronger portion of the brain than the cortex. By communicating in that language, in Theta, which coincidentally is also related to the eureka moments. Aha! In other words, again, that is another language or a brainwave state that we're not very familiar with. Yet another language of the brain, something called alpha. Alpha is up to 8 cycles per second. And at 8 cycles per second, up to 8 cycles per second, this is a language of relaxation. The language of relaxation is extremely, extremely important. Why? In order to achieve peak performance, in order to do anything of value, you need to be able to shift gears, get on the neutral, and then from that point on, you can either shift on upwards or downwards. But if you're not able to relax, you're just burning yourself out. Last but not least, there is beta. Beta is the cortex. This is the functional alert awake right now. I'm in beta in order for me to be able to have this conversation, to think linearly, logically. And it's a very important state. But in this language of the brain, there's also a subset of that language that is responsible and is associated with, especially in the high beta for rumination, anxiety, stress, and for many people it becomes their life. The prevalence of anxiety, depression, and just basically stress-related disorders, which translates into the physical conditions very strongly, is tremendous. And then of course there's gamma. Gamma is in the frequency range of 31 to 100 cycles per second, and gamma is an amazing state, especially around 40 cycles per second. Around that frequency it has been most researched, I should say, and it's associated with the peak human performance. In other words, if you're not just an athlete, but if you're an Olympic athlete, if you're at the top of your game, it's also goes very strongly and very well with theta and the interaction of the two. So these are what we call at Summit Wellness the languages of the brain, and they truly are languages.